A woman throws a glass of water in a waiter's face, assuming he'd never have the courage to stand up for himself. But instead of backing down, he does something she never expected. Want to know how this story ends? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. It was just another day, or so Michael thought, as he tidied up tables with his usual precision and pride in his work. His uniform was spotless, his smile steady, but as Lauren approached, he felt a shift in the air, a tension that's hard to define but unmistakable. She barely glanced at him, her eyes scanning the room as if she were a queen, gracing commoners with her presence. When she finally looked at him, it was with a stare so cold, it sent a chill down Michael's spine. "Oh, they really lowered the standards here, didn't they?" she sneered, eyes narrowing. Michael, ever the professional, forced a smile and nodded politely, even as her words echoed in his mind. And, while he tried to brush it off, there was no mistaking the sting of her gaze and the bite in her words, lingering in the air like a shadow. Lauren continued her passive-aggressive comments, throwing out little jabs that could almost be overlooked, except they were perfectly calculated. I mean, don't they have some kind of standards for staff? Or is it all just filling quotas now? Her voice was low, but dripping with a venom Michael hadn't encountered in a long time. He knew what she meant, even if she didn't spell it out. It was moments like these that made him question humanity, but he stayed calm, channeling all his energy into maintaining composure. He focused on the task at hand, reminding himself that he had worked hard to be here. Yet, no matter how professional he tried to be, he could feel the hurt taking root, and as her words piled up, that hurt began to feel heavy, pressing down on him with each passing minute. As Michael tried to maintain his distance, Lauren leaned closer, as if drawn by the thrill of pushing boundaries. "It's not like you have anything else going on, right?" she said with a smirk, eyes flicking over his uniform dismissively. It was a direct hit, an insult wrapped up in faux curiosity that made his chest tighten. She seemed to revel in each reaction she could pull from him, each flicker of discomfort he tried so hard to mask. But Michael wasn't one to give in so easily. He had learned, through hard experience, that resilience wasn't just an option, it was survival. His silence was his armor, but he knew that if this continued, even the strongest armor could crack. Little did Lauren know, though, she was pushing him right up to a line he was beginning to consider crossing. When the shift reached its peak, with a bustling crowd around them, Lauren turned one last time, locking eyes with Michael, almost daring him to react. "You know," she said with a feigned casualness, "I bet they just hired you to check off a box. Not much else you'd be good for, would you?" Her words hung in the air, each syllable laced with a chilling mix of entitlement and prejudice. Michael's hands clenched involuntarily, and he took a breath, letting the words wash over him without reacting, but inside, the tension grew. He'd always believed that patience and kindness could bridge gaps, but in this moment, he felt that belief start to waver. And in that silent, fraught moment, something within him started to shift. The restaurant was buzzing, with tables filled and chatter echoing off the walls, creating a lively symphony that usually energized Michael. But today, the noise was just a backdrop to a scene unfolding with uncomfortable tension. Lauren, feeling emboldened, decided to push her disrespect further, as if probing to see just how far she could go. She called Michael over, snapping her fingers as though he were a servant, not a person. "Are you even paying attention? I'd hate to think I'm waiting because you're slacking off," she taunted, her voice dripping with disdain. Michael, swallowing his pride, simply nodded, responding with the professionalism that had carried him through countless shifts. But Lauren wasn't satisfied with mere compliance. She wanted a reaction, something to validate her superiority. As Michael returned with her order, Lauren's expression twisted into one of irritation, though there was no fault with his service. She took the glass of water he handed her and inspected it with exaggerated scrutiny, rolling her eyes as though he'd just made some colossal blunder. "Seriously? You call this service?" she sneered, her voice pitched just loud enough to turn heads. Michael's hands were steady, his face calm, but inside a storm brewed. Lauren smirked, leaning forward as if she were sharing a private joke at his expense. "I guess you can't expect too much from someone like you," she whispered, her words dripping with malice. Michael felt the insult, deep and sharp, but he took a breath, maintaining his calm. This was his workplace, his territory, and he would not let her rob him of his dignity. And then, with a theatrical sigh, Lauren did the unthinkable. In one swift, casual motion, she flung the contents of her glass right into Michael's face, sending cold water cascading down his shirt and dripping from his chin. Gasps filled the room, a collective intake of breath as the patrons turned to witness the scene. Time seemed to slow as Michael stood there, soaked and humiliated, his mind racing. He could feel the stares of everyone around him, the shock, the disbelief. He wiped his face, blinking away the sting of both the water and her cruelty. But instead of lowering his head or backing down, he straightened his shoulders, looking Lauren squarely in the eyes. "Ma'am, I think you've crossed a line," he said, his voice steady, carrying a quiet power. There was no anger in his tone, only a firm resolve that hinted at a dignity she couldn't touch. The crowd was silent, watching this standoff unfold. Lauren, caught off guard by his response, faltered for a split second, but quickly masked it with a sneer. "Oh, please," she scoffed, dismissing him with a wave. But there was an unmistakable tension in the air now, a shift, subtle but powerful, as people murmured and exchanged glances. Michael didn't have to say more. His silence spoke volumes, a statement of self-respect she could neither break nor bend. He took a step back, maintaining eye contact, unyielding. Lauren, for all her bravado, was beginning to feel the weight of her own actions, even as she tried to laugh it off. Little did she know, however, that her behavior had not gone unnoticed by someone who held the authority to put a stop to it. As the tension reached its peak, Tom, the restaurant manager, who had been observing from a distance, stepped forward with a steady, purposeful stride. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes showed the sharp focus of someone who'd seen enough. He'd watched Lauren's display, from her subtle jabs to the shocking moment she threw water at Michael, and he could feel the unease that had swept over the restaurant. Walking up to the table, Tom addressed Lauren with a polite but firm tone, the authority in his voice unmistakable. "Ma'am, I need a word with you," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. Lauren looked up, slightly surprised, but not yet worried. After all, she had never been held accountable for behavior like this before. Lauren, still confident, responded with a dismissive laugh, attempting to brush Tom off as she had with Michael. "Is there a problem? I thought we were paying for service here," she sneered, glancing around as if to gather support from the patrons nearby. But instead of the validation she sought, she found only silent, disapproving faces. Tom took a breath, choosing his words carefully, but there was no mistaking the firmness in his tone. "Throwing water at a member of our staff is completely unacceptable," he said, his voice steady, echoing through the room. "We don't tolerate disrespect in this establishment, toward anyone." The crowd around them, having witnessed the entire incident, murmured their support, and Lauren's smirk faltered. For the first time, she sensed that she wasn't in control of this narrative. Lauren, visibly flustered, tried to regain her composure, her voice sharp as she attempted to talk her way out of the situation. "Are you seriously going to take his side? This is absurd. I'm the customer here," she argued, voice growing louder with each word, as if volume alone could sway the crowd. But Tom was unyielding. He kept his tone respectful, yet firm, a quiet authority radiating from him as he stood his ground. "Ma'am, you've crossed the line, and we cannot allow this behavior here. I'll have to ask you to leave," he stated, the finality in his voice signaling there would be no negotiation. Lauren's face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief, her fingers curling into fists as she struggled to hold back a retort. She hadn't expected consequences, and the sudden shift left her visibly rattled. With no other choice, Lauren grabbed her things, rising from the table with a defiant glare directed at both Michael and Tom. As she stormed out of the restaurant, she threw one last parting shot over her shoulder, her voice carrying the threat like a dark cloud. "This isn't over. I'll make sure you regret this," she spat, her eyes flashing with anger. But Tom remained unfazed, watching her leave with a calm resolve, knowing he'd done the right thing. Michael, standing nearby, felt an unexpected wave of relief mixed with gratitude. For the first time since the encounter began, he felt truly supported. But as Lauren exited, her threat still lingered in the air, a subtle reminder that the story wasn't over, and her need for revenge would soon return to haunt him. In the days that followed, Michael tried to put the incident behind him, focusing on his work and the steady rhythm that usually brought him peace. But Lauren's threat wasn't just empty words. It was the start of a deliberate retaliation. One morning, Michael was called into the manager's office, where Tom sat with a concerned look, holding a formal complaint in his hands. Lauren had filed a grievance, accusing Michael of aggressive behavior and unprofessional conduct. The words on the page were twisted beyond recognition, painting her as the victim and Michael as the instigator. Tom looked up, sympathy clear in his eyes, and reassured Michael that the restaurant had no intention of taking her side. But still, the complaint left a bitter taste, a reminder of how easily someone like Lauren could distort reality to fit her agenda. Michael, though shaken, was determined not to let this set him back. He went about his duties with a renewed focus, yet the unease lingered, especially as rumors began to spread. Some patrons who had witnessed the incident stepped forward, confirming Michael's version of events, and Tom rallied the team, expressing full support for him. Yet there was an underlying tension. Lauren's influence seemed to reach further than anyone anticipated. She contacted local blogs and forums, painting herself as the victim of discrimination, stirring up public opinion in her favor. Michael couldn't believe the lengths she was willing to go to twist the story, to manipulate others into seeing her as the aggrieved party. It was a reminder that, even when the truth was on his side, perception could be a powerful enemy. One evening, as Michael prepared to close up, a few patrons approached him quietly, offering words of support and recounting what they had seen. Each testimony strengthened his resolve, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this battle. Together, they helped Tom compile a report, backed by witness statements from both staff and customers, solidifying Michael's stance and proving the truth. Yet, despite the evidence, there was a lingering dread, a sense that Lauren's next move could still bring more trouble. Her persistence was unsettling, her need for revenge relentless. But Michael took comfort in the loyalty and support of those around him, a network of allies who believed in his integrity and were willing to stand up for him. Then, almost as if orchestrated by fate, a breakthrough came in the form of surveillance footage. The video captured the entire incident, from Lauren's verbal abuse to the shocking moment she threw water at Michael. It was undeniable proof, a vindication of everything he had endured. With the video in hand, Tom assured Michael that they now had the final piece to put the dispute to rest, should Lauren continue her crusade. Yet, deep down, Michael knew that her retaliation wouldn't end here. Lauren's type of rage wasn't easily quelled, and he braced himself for whatever she might throw his way next. The storm had quieted, but he could feel a lingering tension, a subtle warning that the worst might still be on the horizon. Word of the incident didn't stop at the restaurant. Somehow, it managed to reach Lauren's own corporate office, where whispers began circulating about her behavior. In a world where reputation could be as fragile as glass, Lauren's actions hadn't gone unnoticed, and soon her company's HR department was compelled to investigate. The irony was almost poetic. Lauren, who had so proudly flaunted her position, now found herself under scrutiny. She was summoned to a formal meeting where a panel sat, awaiting her explanation. As she walked in, her confidence wavered. The authoritative faces staring back at her held no sympathy, only a desire for the truth. In the silent room, Lauren felt a rare vulnerability, the weight of her choices pressing down harder than she'd anticipated. Meanwhile, Michael, still determined to defend his name, was notified about the inquiry and asked to provide any evidence that could clarify the situation. Tom, ever supportive, accompanied him to the meeting, where they presented the surveillance footage, a single recording that captured every word, every insult, every moment of disrespect. As the video played, Lauren's facade began to crack. Her usual poise faltered as each frame replayed the truth she had so desperately tried to rewrite. Her co-workers watched in stunned silence, and the reality of her actions became undeniable. When the video finished, a heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by Michael's calm words as he reiterated his commitment to professionalism, despite the treatment he had endured. The panel, visibly moved by the evidence, turned to Lauren, awaiting her response. But she had no defense, no clever spin to place herself in a better light. She stammered, attempting to downplay her actions, but it was clear the narrative had slipped from her control. For someone used to wielding power with ease, this was a crushing blow. As HR representatives exchanged quiet glances, a decision was made to suspend Lauren while further inquiries took place. Her sense of control shattered. Lauren left the room visibly shaken, realizing that her actions had consequences she couldn't escape. The tables had turned, and for the first time, she faced real accountability. As Michael and Tom exited the building, a quiet sense of victory filled the air. Michael wasn't one to take pleasure in others' misfortune, but there was a certain justice in knowing that truth had finally prevailed. He felt a strange relief, a weight lifted, as though he'd reclaimed a part of his dignity that Lauren had tried to strip away. Yet he couldn't shake a lingering sense of caution. Lauren's rage, he knew, was fueled by an intense need to win, and losing control was not something she would accept easily. With each step he took away from that building, he braced himself, sensing that her final confrontation was yet to come, lurking just beyond sight. Days passed with an eerie quiet, but Michael knew it was just a calm before the storm. True to his intuition, Lauren reappeared, this time catching him outside the restaurant as he was leaving for the day. She stood there on the street, a dark determination in her eyes, her posture rigid and fists clenched. "You think you're going to get away with this?" she sneered, her voice laced with venom. Michael stayed silent, feeling the familiar weight of her hostility, but determined not to engage. Yet she pressed on, stepping closer and raising her voice so that passers-by couldn't help but notice. "You ruined my career!" she yelled, drawing the attention of curious onlookers who slowed down, watching the scene unfold. As the crowd gathered, Lauren's anger spiraled. She leaned in close, hurling insult after insult, her voice growing louder with each word. "You're nothing but a fraud," she spat, her face twisted in rage. "A diversity token who doesn't deserve the place they handed to you." Michael felt each word hit like a blow, but he stood firm, knowing any reaction could only fuel her fire. His silence seemed to provoke her even more. With a final sneer, Lauren's control snapped. She raised her hand, shoving him back, her fingers digging into his shoulder as she pushed him with surprising force. The crowd gasped, the tension thick as they witnessed the unprovoked aggression, a display that left no room for ambiguity. In the next moment, the situation escalated as Lauren, blinded by rage, raised her hand again, this time striking Michael across the face. The slap echoed, a shocking sound that seemed to freeze time. The crowd, now fully engaged, watched in stunned silence, and someone in the back shouted, "Call the police!" Michael, still reeling from the blow, straightened, refusing to let her see the pain she had caused. Yet, before he could even process the turn of events, a police officer appeared, stepping in swiftly to defuse the situation. "Ma'am, that's enough," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Lauren, caught off guard, stammered a defense, trying to paint herself as the victim, but the witnesses surrounding them spoke up, each recounting what they had seen. The officer, taking in the testimonies and the obvious evidence, turned to Lauren and informed her that she was under arrest for assault. She protested, her voice shrill as she tried to twist the narrative yet again, but the officer remained unmoved, reading her rights as he placed the cuffs around her wrists. The crowd murmured in approval, some even offering words of support to Michael, who stood quietly, his resolve intact. As Lauren was led away, her face a mix of rage and disbelief, Michael felt a profound sense of relief wash over him. This confrontation had taken a toll, but it had also marked the end of her relentless harassment. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he was free of her cruelty, ready to move forward without the shadow of her bitterness hanging over him. In the days following Lauren's arrest, Michael found himself reflecting on the entire ordeal, the moments replaying in his mind like scenes from a difficult yet transformative story. He hadn't just defended himself against prejudice, he had taken a stand for everyone who had ever felt devalued or dismissed. For so long, he'd believed that the best way to survive was to stay silent, to keep his head down and focus on his work. But this experience had shown him a different path, the power of asserting one's dignity, of meeting injustice with quiet resilience. He felt a newfound sense of pride, a deep-seated strength that came from knowing he had withstood the storm and had come out the other side stronger, with his integrity intact. As he continued working, he noticed the respect and warmth that his colleagues and regular patrons showed him, as if they, too, had been part of his journey. They didn't need to say it out loud. The supportive smiles, the kind gestures, all of it reassured him that he wasn't alone. Even Tom, the manager who had stood by his side through it all, seemed to carry a deeper admiration for him. "You know, Michael," Tom said one evening as they closed up, "you showed all of us what it means to stand tall." The words touched him, echoing the support he had felt from everyone who had come forward, each of them a piece of the shield that had protected him in the darkest moments. Michael couldn't help but think of others who faced similar battles, those who felt they had no voice against discrimination or hostility. His experience had opened his eyes to the importance of solidarity and the strength that lay in a supportive community. He found himself thinking of ways he could give back, perhaps even mentoring others who felt silenced or alone. This journey had shifted something fundamental within him. It was as if he'd unlocked a purpose beyond just doing his job. He realized he could become a source of inspiration, an example of what it meant to face adversity with grace, and to let one's actions speak louder than words. His resolve to rise above the pain wasn't just about himself anymore. It was about setting a precedent for others to follow. And as he walked home that evening, beneath a sky painted with the warm hues of sunset, Michael felt a sense of closure settling over him, peaceful and profound. The experience had been challenging, painful even, but it had shaped him in ways he hadn't anticipated. No longer burdened by the need to prove himself, he felt free, standing on a foundation built on courage, resilience, and the quiet support of those who believed in him. He knew there would be more challenges in life, more people like Lauren who would try to pull others down. But now, armed with the knowledge of his own strength and the unwavering support of his community, Michael felt ready for whatever lay ahead. This wasn't just an end, it was a new beginning. Moral of the story. Michael showed courage by standing up for himself with dignity. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to defend your worth? How did you react? Do you think you'd do the same thing again, or would you handle it differently now? Share with us in the comments. Answer this: have you faced a moment like this? How did it make you feel? And if you want more stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing.